All right. So I'm here with AJ McCord, who is a sports anchor and reporter for KOIN TV. AJ, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Staying up, staying healthy.
Good.
So can you tell me a bit about what your job is at KOIN and how you got into the field?
Yeah, so I am a sports reporter and anchor at KOIN. I've been in sports television since I was a high schooler, in high school, I think, and loved it. So I do a lot of different things for KOIN, but primarily I report, I anchor, I will turn feature stories. Last year, it involved a lot of, I went with the Blazers all the way through their playoff series in Denver and then into Oakland, and before that, Oklahoma. And this year, like with the Ducks, I went with them to the Rose Bowl. We turned a show. So I primarily just follow our Northwest teams wherever they may go. We went with the Seahawks to Green Bay this year. That feels like a lifetime ago, but it was just in January.
And what was your first sports journalism gig, and what was social media, your use of it like when you started?
Yeah, my first job in sports journalism was I was actually the intern for Dick Enberg when he was at the Padres. And do you know who that is?
Yes.
Okay, so he was wonderful. He became like a second grandpa to me. And it was awesome. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot about storytelling. I learned a lot about connecting with people. Was definitely a safe place to make some mistakes, my first job. But at that point, social media was hardly around. That would have been 2010, 11, somewhere in there. So like we used Twitter occasionally, but he certainly never did. But I would post updates from Padres and stuff. But nothing compared. It's not even comparable to what it is now.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think it's changed in the sports journalism world specifically?
Well, it's opened up really like a whole new way of getting in touch with people, right? Because instead of having to wait for me to see you at the ballpark or see you on the court or at the field, whatever it is, now you know what these guys are doing and women are doing a lot of the times because they share their personal lives. And so then all of a sudden, instead of me, it almost gives you a better way to get to know them through their social media feeds. But then also, like, for example, in this pandemic, right, I've covered the Blazers for 3 seasons. The players all know me. I've been on the road with them. We've got a pretty good working relationship. And so when everything started, I started reaching out to these guys on Instagram and saying, hey, you want to do a story? You want to just catch up, have some fun? And so we ended up doing a whole series called Quarantine Chronicles with 4 or 5 of the Blazers guys. We got some Timbers players on there. We got some NFL guys. And all of that was through social media, was how I lined those up and then got connected and ended up doing the story. So I think it's really opened up an entire new world of how not only reporters can connect with athletes, but people like fans can connect with athletes.
And can you kind of talk about the aspect of like connecting with fans from like a journalist perspective? Because now you have the opportunity to hear back from people that watch KOIN or read what you put out.
Oh, like from getting feedback on social media?
Yeah.
Yep, that's a double-edged sword. You have people who there are some things that you do that people really, really like, and then you have some things that you do that people really, really don't like. And you hear about it from both perspectives. But again, at the same time, I've gotten a lot of story ideas because people have sent them to me on Instagram or on Twitter or on Facebook. And it's also really cool to see when you share a story or when you tell someone's story and then they reshare it. It's also really cool to see how they share your story as well, if that makes sense. So it's a double-edged sword of being that accessible to everybody, for sure.
For sure. And you talked about the Quarantine Chronicles a little bit, but how has COVID-19 affected the work that you've been doing at KOIN, and how has social media kind of played a role in that?
Yeah, I've been very lucky with KOIN and how they've handled everything with the pandemic because we've been able to stay in sports. And so they really gave us pretty free reign and said, just keep telling great stories. And so that's what we did. We just kept telling stories. Some of them were funny. Some of them were personal. Some of them were hard, especially as after George Floyd's death, we dove into a lot of things with a ton of athletes in the Pacific Northwest about just how that affected them, things like that. So yeah, I think the pandemic has changed a lot of things, but at the same time, it's almost distilled what reporting and storytelling is back to its roots, because we didn't have to worry about practice. We didn't have to worry about games. We didn't have to worry about, oh, we scheduled 15 minutes for this interview and you have to be somewhere, because no one had to be anywhere. And so you could get on Zoom. And that was what happened a few times where, you'd get on Zoom with someone like Yusuf Nurkic and I'd asked him for 15 minutes and we end up on the phone for 40 minutes. And then I have to turn that 40-minute call into a 5-minute story. So yeah, I think it really just like sort of distilled what we can do, or what I feel passionate about doing, at least, which is storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And on the note of challenges, what do you think are the biggest challenges that a journalist faces because of social media?
I think comparison is always a really difficult one, because it's so easy to compare yourself to other reporters in your position or in the next position that you want to be in, and see their followings or see their content and feel like, a bit of imposter syndrome. But then I also think, really, at least for me, I'm a pretty private person naturally. And so social media is hard for me to like let people in. But I also want people to get, to have the opportunity to know who I am away from the microphone and outside of KOIN. And so, yeah, I think the biggest challenge in using social media is figuring out how you want to use it, because everyone will choose that very differently. And there's not necessarily like a wrong answer in that, but becoming okay with your way of using social media and being confident that that's the best way for you, even though it may look different than a lot of other people's.
And what professional or college experience do you think has helped you the most in understanding of social media journalism? Was there like one certain instance?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think in like little things when I was first starting, and like you'd want to get it out there so fast that like I'd have a typo or I'd have a mistake and immediately you'd get railed on social media. I think that happened a few times, particularly in my younger years, I guess you could say, learning how to use social media. And that was always hard, just because no one wants, you don't like being wrong ever. And so I think for me, that always reiterated, it is so much better, and it is really the only way to do it, to be right as opposed to being first. And so I will double and triple check everything that I put out on social media, because people keep those receipts, and you do not want to be labeled as somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, or whatever, because you made a mistake.
For sure. How do you think social media can help a journalist earn a career in the field?
Well, I think what's great about social media is it really gives you your own medium to present your work, right? Before, like when I was in college, everyone was about making a website. And so that was how you'd put up your reel, you'd put up your writing samples. That was how you did it. But now, to some extent, you'd probably still want to have a website, but social media has allowed you to have a platform and build a following before you ever get out of college, before you ever get paid to have an opinion or get paid to know what you're talking about. And so I think, used the right way, it can really be a catapult for people. The flip side of that is, if you don't use it correctly, again, there are receipts. And so I think that's sort of, I guess, how I would see it helping and potentially hurting.
Mm-hmm. And on the topic of like the following, how much do you think it helps to have like engagements on posts on social media if you're a journalist?
I think it's good. I think every company will look at that differently, but for the most part, it's always a good thing when people are interacting with you.
Mm-hmm. And can you describe the impact that social media has had on journalism as a whole and on sports journalism?
Ooh, well, I think as a whole, it just really has broken down. I mean, I don't really know that I'm an expert on this, but I guess in my opinion, I think it really has broken down a barrier between fans and media so that, you can see what I'm seeing as soon as I'm seeing it, as opposed to having to wait for the 5 o'clock news or having to wait for the sports cast or for the game broadcast. So I think it really has broken it down for both media and sports media.
If a sports journalist wants to get started, like building their brand through social media, which platform do you think they should start with?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think you're going to get a different answer every single person you ask that. I think Twitter is really great if you want to get into breaking news and insider stuff. I think Instagram is better for sharing long form pieces because Twitter puts a 2-minute and 20-second cap on you. And Facebook is great for both, but you just have to know who's using Facebook primarily. So I think that you're going to get a different answer for every single person that says that.
Definitely. All right, I've got one last question for you, and I really appreciate your time. I want to make sure that you can get to where you're going. What do you think is the future of social media journalism? And for example, what do you think it could look like 10 years from now?
Oh, man, that's hard. I'm sure there'll be something new, and I'm sure I'll be the last one on it. But I just think it's going to keep evolving in the same way that we've sort of seen it as you're getting more and more personal, more and more access. And again, it's something that can be so personalized as well as personal, right? So one person may, ironically, almost none of my friends are on social media at all, like any of my close friends, but I don't know a single reporter who doesn't have a social media presence. And so I think similarly though, every reporter I know uses it differently with what they share, what they choose not to, as far as personal stuff. So I think it's hard to predict what's going to happen in 10 years because technologically it seems like everything changes every single day, but definitely see it still evolving.
Definitely. All right. Well, AJ, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.